Hello, dear students. This is World Literature course, and the title of the present lecture is The Anglophone Indian Novel in the 1980s and 90s, which means novels that were written about 30 or 40 years following the double event of partition and independence. Many critics of the Anglophone Indian novel have discussed the statement that the novels of the 80s and 90s were basically responding to the present needs of the country. Such a statement, in order to be fully comprehended, requires a discussion of two brands of nationalism: Gandhian nationalism on the one hand versus Nehruvian nationalism on the other. Mahatma Gandhi wrote a book entitled Hind Swaraj or Self-Rule in 1909. This book reflected the conservative traditional worldview of Gandhi, and in the book he espoused the vision that Western civilization has led to severe damage of the Indian culture and lifestyle, and for Gandhi, the only means of salvation was a return to the simplicity of village life and a disavowal of everything related to Western civilization, including the English language. In his book, Gandhi was talking about such concepts as self-sacrifice, self-control, passive resistance, non-violence, and most importantly, he was calling for a form of holding to religion, but he said that he didn't mean particular creeds. He wasn't referring particularly to Hinduism, Islam, or Christianity, rather to a religion that transcends all religions. It was more like an ethical system of values. And to him, this adherence to religion as an ethical system of values was bound to help people to live in harmony and to coexist peacefully in the post-independence era. However, the fact that Gandhi rejected everything related to Western modernity, technology, progress, etc., meant that his vision was seen by most to be a sort of idealist or utopian or non-pragmatic vision that was not fit to be implemented in the post-independence India. And we need to mention that Gandhi's view of religion does not contradict the fact of his secularism or of the secularism of his world vision. He envisioned an India in which religion was relegated to the private sphere rather than the public sphere. He wanted a secular country, a secular form of government or a secular system of government in which citizenship with its rules and duties and rights was the only reigning idea. All citizens of the newly independent Indian nation, according to Gandhi, were supposed to be equal regardless of their religious identities. On the other hand, Jawaharlal Nehru, in his book The Discovery of India, that was written in English and published 1 year before independence in 1946, so it's 1 year before the August 1947 date of independence and partition, Jawaharlal Nehru had a very advanced and progressive vision of the post-independence India. He wanted his country to follow the pattern of Western modernity. He wanted to prioritize economy. He believed that economic issues need to be resolved, and if they are resolved, this will automatically lead to a resolution of the social problems of India. Again, Nehru had a secular world vision. To him, politics and religion needed to be separated, and religion was mainly a private matter. So these two, Gandhi and Nehru, these two loyal friends and allies for a long time during the struggle for independence, they didn't see eye to eye when it came to the post-independence system of government. They agreed about the non-sectarianism and the secularism of India's regime. They agreed that this is the only means to secure a peaceful coexistence in a place of such diverse languages, religions, and even races. But on the other hand, they differed in their attitude towards modernity and towards progression. Gandhi was assassinated, as we all know from history. He was tragically assassinated in January 1948, a few months after independence. And his assassin was an extreme Hindu activist who believed that the tolerant view of Gandhi towards Muslims was a danger to the newly independent state of India. This assassin actually expressed no regrets and no grief at all, and during the trial, he was proud of his murderous action, announcing that he would repeat it if given the chance. As for Jawaharlal Nehru, we all know that he became the first Prime Minister of India after independence, a position which gave him the chance to implement his vision, and indeed he implemented this secular, non-sectarian, economic, developmental vision to the great benefit of Indian economy and society and worldwide reputation. After almost 30 years, or less than 30 years, in 1971, I think, Nehru died, and Indira Gandhi, who happens to be the daughter of Nehru and no relation at all of Gandhi, but Gandhi is a family name that she took after her marriage. Indira Gandhi became the first woman prime minister after independence, and within a few years of her rule, there was such political unrest that she had to announce a state of emergency. This state of emergency was actively putting an end to the Nehruvian consensus, because under Nehru there was a form of democracy, and there was a development and as we said, non-sectarianism and secularism. But the period of the national emergency, or sometimes just known as the emergency under Indira Gandhi, from 1975 to 1977, this period, although it might seem short, just 2 years, was a turning point in modern Indian history, in the Indian history after independence. And it was a big influence when it comes to the novels that were written in the 80s and 90s. And this is the explanation of how these novels were responding to the present needs of the country. Most of these novels, if not all of them, were anti-emergency novels. They were also allegories of the nation. They were historical novels who were giving their own versions of the events that led to the independence and the partition, but they were basically anti-emergency novels, rejecting the dictatorship, the censorship of the press, the imprisonment of opposition, the lack of civil rights, all these elements that are part and parcel of emergency rule. Now, this emergency was accompanied by a rise in the ideology of Hindutva, which is an extreme right ideology that believes that India is only for the Hindu people, and it was the ideology mainly of the Bharatiya Janata Party, which, by the way, is the ruling party nowadays in 2021 in India under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So the rise of Hindutva and the emergency, these two factors, they led to the type of novels that we see during the 80s and 90s, and that we will discuss briefly today, two of these novels. And also it led to a certain branch of historical studies, the emergence of a certain branch of historical studies known as the subaltern studies, in which historians were re-examining the narrative of the nation. Since 3 decades and 4 decades have already passed since independence, the subaltern studies started conducting a form of re-examination or re-investigation, again in an attempt to see what went wrong and in an attempt to try to go back to the Nehruvian consensus. The novels were influenced by these subaltern studies, and the subaltern studies also were influenced by the literary productions of the period. So let us discuss briefly two of these novels. The first one is entitled A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. It was first published in 1993, and the events of the novel are set in the 1950s, which means during the high days of Nehruvian consensus. The novel uses realism as a narrative technique, and it can be considered a Nehruvian epic because it is so much influenced by Nehru's The Discovery of India. For example, the novel was mentioning the land laws. That was one of the important steps taken by Nehru's government, an act of redistribution of agricultural lands among the peasants. And the novel also is mainly focused on family life through the life of a number of families, 3 Hindu family and 1 Muslim family, and the interrelations between them, family interrelations, weddings, engagements, love affairs, university life, parliament and its sessions. It was engaged as a novel in the political and familial life of the Indian population during a period of 1950s, which is the period when India was like building itself at high speed after the independence of 1947. This novel has a third-person omniscient narrator and is written almost in a uniform style of English, although you can find some Hindu words here and there, but mainly it is in like uniform style of English and uniform realist mode with a linear narrative going from one year to the next and so on. And again, it is an allegory of the nation. It seems to advocate that the only solution of the tensions and problems that India was undergoing during the times of the publication of the novel, they could only be solved by a return to the Nehruvian consensus. Actually, this novel and also the next novel, the novel by Salman Rushdie entitled Midnight's Children in 1981, first published in 1981, both novels, as well as many others, they are influenced by Nehru's The Discovery of India, or by the Nehruvian developmental, secular, economic priorities, and they are a very clear illustration of Bakhtin's concept of the dialogism of the novel genre. The novel, according to Bakhtin, allows multiple voices, a heteroglossia of voices, to interact. And these voices do not necessarily preclude each other. They don't have to reach one final resolution with the dominance of one voice and the defeat of all the other voices. So this is a very useful characteristic of the novel. And these novelists, Seth and Rushdie and others, they made perfect use of it in their novels. So reading the novels, we get a multiplicity of points of view. We get a multiplicity of versions of the national narrative of the Indian past during the struggle for independence and in the years surrounding the independence and the partition. And the novels are not didactic in any sense, but they make the reader form his own viewpoint depending on what is happening, and this viewpoint usually would be supportive of a return to the Nehruvian consensus. Rushdie's novel, Midnight's Children, refers to a number of children who were born exactly at the midnight hour on the night of August 14th, 15th, which is the night of independence and partition of India on the one hand and Pakistan on the other. These children, they come from different religious, class, linguistic, regional backgrounds, and they speak different languages, but they all have this common date with the nation. They share the birth date of the nation. And the narrator, the first person narrator of Rushdie's novel, Salim Sinai, belongs to the Muslim minority, although we are later made to understand that he has this mixed genealogy, this ancestry that has Christians and Hindus as well as Muslims. So he seems to be like a symbol of the multiculturalism of the Indian nation. And the narrative is not in the realistic mode like Seth's novel. Actually, it can be considered magic realism, and it is juxtaposing mythic elements with secular elements, with realist elements. Everything is juxtaposed. And as we said, it is far from linear. There are multiple digressions. And even the language reflects the multiplicity of the situation, because although the language is mainly English, yet there are so many new words that are neologisms and partly formed from Indian languages and partly from English languages. So actually, in form and in content, it reflects the situation, especially when there is this metaphor that the narrator Salim himself will disintegrate into 600 million parts which was the population census at the time of the novel, in order to like depict the identity dilemma of the people. So, in all of these novels, we have narratives of partition, we have themes of multiculturalism, we have this issue of the minority identity and this issue of the emergency and the rise of the ideology of Hindutva with the fall of the Nehruvian consensus. All these elements are there in Rushdi's novel, in Seth's novel, as two representative texts of the 1980s and the 1990s, of novels that are responding to the present needs of the country. That's all for today's lecture. Thanks a lot, and meet you next week, inshallah. Good luck.